Good afternoon. So we've got two very young, we've got people who were editors when they were very young. They still are very young. We are not going to direct.
Thank you. Not true, but thank you so much.
It was
Well,
a good
young
save.
at heart.
It was a good save.
Yeah, yeah. It's a young,
Your heart's in
young,
the
and,
right place.
young at heart.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
And it matters, right? I think in some ways, if you're connected to writing or reading, you have to be somewhat young, right? Your heart has to sort of have this
Agreed.
optimism. And interestingly, it was Meru, while in the long list of all the people that she edited, she's also been Veer's editor.
Yes, for more than one book.
More than one book.
Yeah.
So, what is the relationship between an editor in terms of a writer-editor and a book editor entailed? If you have to give one word, what would you be looking? What were you looking at when you were when you were
I'll
looking
give
for
you
an
a
editor?
sentence.
Yeah.
I think the job of any editor, as far as the writer is concerned, is to make the work better.
Yeah.
The reason I enjoyed working with Meru is that the book we finally published was about 40% better than it would have been if I hadn't had an editor. Now, it's not always true. So I
Yeah.
was very grateful to have had her as an editor.
Thank you, Veer. That's very kind of you because not all authors are this grateful, I can tell you. But I think what you've said is right. It's the job of an editor to be invisible, I think, first of all, invisible to the process, invisible to the book. I always think of it, imagine there's a fashion designer and there's a darzi, and the author is the fashion designer and the editor is the darzi. And it should always stay that way. Because the whole point of great editing is not to impose yourself onto the vision of the author. And obviously the same goes for Darzis as well.
Yeah.
And I loved working with Veer because he was exceptionally open to the editing process. He knew he had the instinct and intelligence to understand that this is not something combative. This is not a criticism. This is all the great writers go through this process willingly and they want it. So, yeah, I really enjoyed working with you.
Thank you. Likewise.
But I think it's also, Meru, in your blog that you've written, you've also said that when you're looking for an editor, there has to be, I think the title was Finding an Editor Soulmate, which is very much like love, right? Or finding a good therapist, possibly as tough. So what really is the aspect of this relationship and the chemistry? Because it's not only about the writer, but it's also about the editor.
Shall I try and answer it first and then I'll hand it to Veer?
If your voice can take it.
Yeah, I
please.
can take
Yes.
it.
Yeah,
okay.
We're
I'm
trying
stronger than I look.
All right, good.
So I think the first and most important thing in the chemistry between an author and an editor is respect. Because a book is an author's baby and you have to trust the person intellectually and also their motives and their motivation to want to help you do that. And because if there's no trust and respect, I don't think none of this can work. I could give the best feedback to you and I don't know how you would take it.
Yeah.
So I think once you've established that you're doing this from a place of wanting his work to be better, and if his work is better, then I benefit from it as well. I think once you've established that basic trust and respect, everything goes well from there. And the second is, of course, honesty, because I have to feel that I can be honest with you as an author and that you won't take it in the wrong way and that you are open and willing to at least listen. If not, you don't have to take every suggestion that an editor gives you. But if you're coming from a place of openness and listening, then I think both the editor and the author benefit from it. So I think those are the main things for me.
Yeah, I think there's when we talk about editing in the newspaper world or the magazine world, we're talking about a film director and that they put the thing together. But there's another kind of editing, which is the kind of editing where you look at a book or you look at an article and you think, how can I make it better?
Yeah.
How can I catch the obvious mistakes? Now, we've never really had that in India when it comes to journalism.
Yeah.
I remember when I joined the Hindustan Times, the guys on the desk who was supposed to correct the copy of the reporters spoke and wrote worse English than the reporters. For instance, things like which now I think is pretty obvious, like the article
Yeah.
nobody knew where to put it. It could be there was a crime yesterday in the Delhi. So you had to say you can't put the.
Put the,
But
yeah.
beyond the point, you can't explain because either the guy sees it or he doesn't see it, or the lady sees it or doesn't see it. So I find now that in many ways the standard of that kind of editing has improved. I actually take no chances. My wife, who's an editor,
Yeah.
edits all my copy before it goes in,
Wow.
including my book, everything. So
Huh.
I'm pretty sure by the time it goes in or how good or bad it is.
Yeah.
But there's on the print where I do a column every week,
Yeah.
there's an editor called Prashant Dikshit. And I don't think there's a single time when I've sent in a column and it's not been at least 20% better because of what he's done.
Yeah.
So that's rare. And
Yeah.
as a columnist or an author, you're very grateful for it.
I think also it's important because I think if you were a journalist, your desk somehow it's a combative or almost a combative relationship, while with in terms of a book it's a different thing. But I wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask Meru first and then I'll ask Veer. People dream of becoming writers, right? Your mother is a writer. You've sort of grown up with the word. Your Patrick was a writer. Sort of, what makes you dream? Do you ever did anybody dream to become an editor? I mean, what does an editor really do?
Good question.
Yes.
That's a great question. So editors are in general, I would just go back to the first thing you said. Do you have to be young at heart? And Veer, I think, is young at heart.
Yeah.
But I am not. I'm very
Also
old
not.
at heart. Yeah.
Huh.
And I think editors are old at heart, many of them. And they're sort of these long-suffering, old at heart kind of souls. It definitely, there is a personality type.
Yeah.
Quite introverted, solitary, wanting to do, just a more invisible kind of work.
Yeah.
And so I would say that, is the quality that draws people to. Why did I become an editor? Honestly, I didn't even know what an editor did till I became one. Because I finished college, I was at Stephens, and I had no plan about what to do with the rest of my life. And I just drifted around for a while.
That
Everybody
sounds
else,
like a journalist, huh?
I know, I mean, it's borderline, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was like, what should I do now? And I knew Ravi Singh of Penguin. And I'd met him a lot, over the years. I just one day on an impulse phoned him up and I said, I want to be an editor. And he said, okay. I said, will you give me a job? And he said, okay, let me think about it. And he gave me some freelance work to do. So after doing a few books, then he gave me a job at Penguin. And so I've been at Penguin and Random House and then Penguin Random House for nearly 20 years since that day. And it's the kind of job which just grows on you. There's no, even today, to this day, if you want to go and learn how to be an editor, there's no school. I would say it's a kind of apprenticeship,
Yeah.
which people accidentally fall upon.
Yeah.
But having said that, I would encourage more people to think about being editors because it's incredibly rewarding. And I've loved every time I've been in, I find it a privilege to be able to work with so many amazing people and have them trust me with their work is a real privilege.
Yeah.
So I encourage people who want to be writers. If some of you also think that you want to be editors, please do it.
So, like you just mentioned, a lot of this, when you've been a journalist for a very, very long time, when you're a good reader, when you've been an editor yourself and not necessarily the copy editor, but essentially someone who commissions, it's also very difficult to put yourself on page and sort of accept, in the sense that, there is this whole aspect of, and it sort of goes into a philosophical thing, where, if you look at all the, you have to also to accept and to receive. You also have to be a kind of person to do that. It's also in some way you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. So when you've reached that top, how do you actually allow someone else, your baby really, into somebody else's hand? How difficult? I mean, how much of it is about vulnerability? How much of it is about keeping an open mind? How much of it is about listening? How do you my question is really, how do you prepare yourself to be the receiver rather than the one who gives out instructions?
It's like when the editor becomes the edited.
Yes, the editor or a doctor. I mean, all doctors are terrible patients, or well, mostly. Sorry for the generalization.
Except that, at least in my case, the process begins before editing. Like, for instance, take my last book, which she published. There was bidding war sounds very grandiose, but there were at least
There
three
was a
people
bidding war.
who displayed interest and had offered money. And I didn't go with the highest bidder. I went with Penguin because I knew she would do the book. So by the time you do that, there's already a certain level of trust. You know you're giving the book to somebody who has a sensibility and that which will help her understand your work quite apart from all the other stuff. Now, for instance, when my book went, I sent it to her chapter by chapter, and it would come back with little notes in the margin saying, this is interesting, tell the full story. Okay, this has gone on too long. Can we cut this short? And you realize then that because my book was a memoir, you sometimes sort of regurgitating stream of consciousness nonsense, and you need somebody there to see it from the perspective of the reader. So the moment you see the editor as somebody who's like a reader, then you say to yourself that this is a sympathetic reader who's told me this is wrong. If it went out as it was, there'll be many unsympathetic readers who will tell me in public that's actually rubbish. So the editor is your ally, and in many ways your protector from the rest of the world.
So, I was reading this thing where, Robert Gottlieb talks about this aspect of a relationship. And I think with Robert Caro, he says that at the end of 50 years, we possibly had a friendship. And my question is that I think there is this moment where he narrates what happened with him in Clinton. And he goes into, Clinton, he's editing Clinton's memoir. And
that would be very interesting to edit.
Right? And he says that apparently, Clinton is in this room filled with all of his, flunky is my word, not his. And he says that, I'm sure we will have a good relationship. And this guy turns around and says, you can ask, he said, actually, Clinton says, you can ask anybody, I'm very good to work with. And Gottlieb turns around and said, well, Mr. President, in this case, you will realize you're actually working for me. Okay, and he said he used to, and the interviewer asked him, when you say Bill, why don't you say Mr. President? Could Mr. President, and he said, I couldn't believe that I cannot have that relationship I cannot have that level of formality. And I wanted to ask you, you've edited so many people. You've edited, Amitav Ghosh, you've edited Jhumpa Lahiri. How do you sort of create this informality with someone who has achieved or is a very accomplished writer and has had other editors? So what is the formula of sort of, becoming their ally rather than, sort of rekindling the spark?
No, I think what you say is interesting, but personally, I've never been that kind of editor. I quite like a certain amount of formality because I think it helps to, I think if you try to make that relationship with your author into everything, that complicates things, for me at least. I want that person, I want to be a blank slate for that person. I don't want them to have to think about my feelings or what I might think. It is at its heart a professional relationship. And so I don't necessarily even seek to introduce formality into it. And if having worked with somebody over a period of time, a friendship naturally develops. Because it's a very close thing, working with somebody about for example, in the case of a memoir, it's quite a personal thing. I think I would go as far as to say that's true of any relationship. The minute you try to introduce an element into it, I don't know if it works. So you have to let every relationship as an editor with your author develop very organically because they will not all be the same. And many of my authors have become very close friends over time. But I don't think I ever set out saying I want to be your friend because I don't know if it works that way.
But I think there is an element of being able to, and would you say that that's it?
No, I don't buy all this friend stuff. At this stage of my life, I'm not looking to make new friends. I'm just looking for people who'll help make my work the best it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's how it should be.
Yeah. Okay. So my question also is that, if you look at it, both of you came into the field. When you came in, you were the youngest editor when there was, and, journalism was sort of finding its feet in a way. And Meru, when you came in, publishing had already established itself. You benefited from the generation of people who actually, were first in their field. And, I was at the Bookmark where there was a 40-year reunion of Kali. where there was Urvashi Butalia and Ritu Menon, and they said when they were starting out in editors, it was a completely male-dominated field, and then now of course it's the other way. The pendulum is swung the other way, and I wanted to ask you, as people who were how much of it is about learning? You, of course, had to learn on the job and to become and this thing. How much of youth and how much of that, how much of it, how did you basically walk onto this uncharted territory? What did you learn? Did you have, how did you sort of create this space where there wasn't any? I mean, most of the people who were reporting to you were older.
All
of them. So how do you sort of create this space? Because in some ways, an editor who is a journalistic editor is also very much what you're looking for. You're looking for someone who will show you the story or shape your story or sort of hold your hand. So in some ways, it's also a relationship. And how do you look at that?
But see, when I entered journalism, I was very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
The reason I became an editor when I was so young was not because I was any good. It's just that there was hardly anybody in the business.
Yeah.
The magazine boom was just beginning. And I'll give you an example. The Times of India, which was then the big boy in Bombay, offered me a job as an assistant editor. And the only qualification you needed for that job was you had to have an Oxbridge degree.
Yeah.
And then you went into this cabin and you wrote 3 leaders, 3 editorials every week. You took your check and you went home. The guys who actually produced the paper had nothing to do with you, and the editors had nothing to do with them. There's a very famous story about Shamlal, who was a legendary editor of the Times of India, going to what he made an infrequent appearance at a party, and there was a guy holding forth, and Shamlal was really impressed, and he said to him, "You're very well informed. What do you do?" He says, "Sir, you don't know me, but I'm your news editor." So that's the kind of distinction there was between editors and reporters. So my generation that came in, we had to sort of start from scratch. I was very fortunate to work for Arun Puri, who was starting the magazine revolution and was introducing new standards. But because we had to rewrite virtually everything in India Today and then in Bombay, which I edited, we had massive problems finding people who could do it. And because editors were, in the sense of writing and correcting, one unknown in Indian journalism, and the editor was just the big boss. Everybody wanted to be an editor because the disparity in salaries between the editors, even these little kids who'd come from Oxford and were made assistant editors, and the people who did the grunt work was so massive. Everybody joined just to become editor. I remember Arun saying to me in frustration, because all the people on the desk want to do other things, hire people who want to die as sub-editors. It was not actually possible. And then Suman Dubey, who was an editor of India Today, said to me, hire English MAs. They will know how to write, they will learn very quickly, there are no jobs for them, and they'll be grateful when you hire them. So it was a very, very different world in those days.
And you?
So, as you rightly said, I was lucky to have stepped into the office. I was 24 when I joined Penguin. And in the same office, there was an extraordinary group of people who were very generous with their time in teaching me and all the other young editors how to edit. So in one office, you had David Davidar and Ravi Singh and Karthika, and you had Krishnan Chopra, who now heads Bloomsbury, and you had Nandini Mehta, you had Udayan Mitra, who now heads HarperCollins. So there was this moment for 2 years when we just all sat next to each other, and then people, of course, went off and started to do different things. But for me, the greatest challenge when I was a young editor was to be taken seriously by older men. Nobody used to take me seriously if I was the one, doing
but
the editing.
At least partly that was because you were a woman also.
He said older men.
Not just age.
Yeah, absolutely. As a young woman, they think, well, it's also a very Indian thing that it's they felt like I was too junior to be handling their book.
Therefore not important enough.
Exactly. So everybody wants the top guy, and they don't want you to do the work. But then over time, once you've done a few people's books and people tell other people that you're a very good editor, then they themselves come and ask you for it. And I would say, I think that I wasn't really planning, about what I would do next. So letting things happen organically for me was the best education. That just seeing what comes your way and learning from that is quite an underrated skill. And I think Veer, in his memoir, and if you haven't read it, please do. It's called A Rude Life.
Yes.
And one of the things...
You're going to hold it up.
Sorry, I have it on my lap.
Let me hold it up.
It's a
Thank you.
Good
Thank you,
life.
the publicity. Go on.
Yeah.
And
You were saying.
Yes.
So one of the things in this book, let me do it again.
yes, important to hold it up.
Everybody's
Thank
seen
you.
it.
Yeah.
So one of the things about this book is, and I would say this is unusual, is, you know, one of the challenges of memoir, both writing it and editing it, is writing about your childhood. Because some people have very boring childhoods. I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but usually it's quite dull as a reader to read about somebody's
Yeah.
childhood. Because it's all like, you know, I had these friends and no one cares as a reader.
Yes.
But Veer had a very interesting childhood. So he, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about that, but editing the part about his childhood was the best part of the book for me.
I agree. I think
Because
his
one of the
episode-
characteristics which comes through
Yeah.
for me as a reader and as an editor is that he's also somebody who just lets things happen and see
Yeah.
where that takes him. And that's worked out really well for him.
Yeah.
That he wasn't somebody who was going around plotting and planning his next move. He doesn't mind just throwing himself into the mix and sort of seeing what happens. And that curiosity is, I think, what it's a characteristic of an editor also. Just to drift along and see what happens. The curiosity of him as a child and as an editor, I think, really comes through in this book. And I really urge you to read it because I enjoyed editing it. And he's had an extraordinary life. And particularly the early part, I find
Yeah.
that fascinating because very few people can write about their childhood in such an interesting way.
and with such clarity. I think
Yeah.
there is a certain aspect
And it's
of
not
the
a
clarity.
straightforward childhood.
No.
You know, parts of it are very, very difficult. But he's written about it very nicely.
Yeah. Would you want to talk a little bit about
No,
what was the toughest?
Enough about my book. We don't want to hijack the session.
Okay, so-
I'm embarrassed already. I started it, but I think now it's time to stop.
But okay, so can I ask you, in the sense that you said that, we were talking about this earlier, and we were at dinner at once when there was Amitabh Ghosh, and we were talking about New York, right? And I think the word that he used at this thing was that he was bludgeoned. His writing was bludgeoned, and can you imagine bludgeoning
Poor Amitabh, his live
Ghosh?
broadcast.
No, but he's a wonderful, wonderful writer. He really is. I mean, for anybody, for him,
is.
yeah, he is. For anybody to try and take away nuance from his writing, it's just. It's this thing, and it wasn't only him. I think you said Naipaul also complained about this thing. So, but there is a certain aspect of American editing and possibly Indian editing. Do you think that you want to talk really about the different types of editing?
I can maybe talk about that for books, but and then maybe you could talk about that. There are different styles of editing in the US and in the UK and in India. So I'll very briefly go into how that works for books and book-related publications.
And he could talk about how, in the sense that the American, if you look at the editor in America, you look at the editor you look at the British editor, you look at Indian editors. There is a certain difference. I think it's also because the way we are. American politicians are different from Indian politicians, and do you think there is a certain quality of an Indian editor that of a magazine or a newspaper that is different?
You explain that technically, and I'll tell you my own experience.
I'll give the technical answer, and then you can give the funny anecdotal answer.
Yes.
Okay. So essentially, editing, there are three types of editing very broadly. There's something called developmental editing, which happens at the very earliest stage of a book or whatever you're writing, right? That's when you develop the ideas, the concepts, you strengthen your argument. That's like, imagine if you're a sculptor, there's a big block of wood and you're just hacking away at it. And you don't use any finer tools. You just hack and get a general shape. After that, once you got your argument and you've said what you want to say, then the next stage of editing is called copy editing, where you go and you go to the line level, the sentence level, the paragraph level, and clarify. So if you're still going back to the sculpture, that's like you're now chiseling. You're kind of making a face where there was just a shape of a face. And then you go even more than that to proofreading finally, where you use your finest tools right at the end, just to make sure you haven't made any mistakes. You're like polishing, you're just finishing things up. Now, editors in different countries do this differently. So American editing is famously heavy-handed. It's leaden and
Yeah.
heavy-handed. So they love long opening sentences. Say, like they might say something like, when somebody was, there'll be some long-winded story and they want it, they want to go on for a really long time. They're very heavy-handed about style in general, saying, the people put an umlaut over this. We put an accent over this. Like the New Yorker, I think, didn't they put an accent over Uber or something like that?
Yes.
Or some crazy thing like that. But the point is, they have this thing called a style sheet, which every publication has, which is, just how they spell things and where they put their italics. There's actually no logic behind it, but they do it. And they're very obsessed by it. British editors are a little bit different. They're a bit more relaxed, I would say. More curious, even. Less worshipful. And they're the ones who, they're funnier and more, they'll put in more humor. They can see the lighter side of things, and they sometimes see things which an American editor won't. Which is not to say one is better or one is worse, they're just different. An Indian editor, I would say, are a mix of the two. So there are some who'll do that very detailed line work and be obsessed by that. And there are others who are more conceptual. So there are all of these different types, and that's what makes it interesting. And, some one kind of editing might be suited to a certain kind of writer. Another one might need something else. And you have to just find your way through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think American editing is much more thorough than editing anywhere in the world. I haven't had a book published in America, but I'll give you a journalistic example. I've written columns for Time magazine. And the thing you notice about, well, not now, but in the glory days of Time magazine, was you never had to read a sentence twice to know what it meant. And I used to wonder how they got that. And there were about 5 or 6 different people, when they didn't have much time because it's a news magazine, who in the space of a few hours edited my copy, kept coming back to me. And this is before the internet, when they had to call or send telexes. And it went all the way up to the editor. And they would argue about whether a word was appropriate or not in a bad way, in a nice sort of way. Can we do this? Some of it was like obvious stuff. Like if I had written when the Rolling Stones came to Bombay, which is an actual example, some years ago, they would say, can we say exactly how many years? Which of course is journalistic terms is much better. If I had written for a British publication, they would let it go. Because they would say that my style was to sort of ramble on a slightly inexact sort of way. But the Americans will want everything exact. The disadvantage with that is, as Mehru suggested, often the prose is so bloody boring and so deadly earnest because they take every stylistic kink that you have and they edit it out. So we, I think, in India have our own tradition, which is either no editing or sort of vaguely British editing.
It's pretty extreme.
But we are basically very few people, I think, at least in journalism, know how to edit copy, unfortunately, and it's going to get worse.
Because A,
people are not interested in journalism. B, they read Twitter. They read stuff on the internet. The whole idea of a journalistic style, of putting a piece together, what it requires, is not something they've grown up with. It's not something that appeals to them. They've been taught sort of to blindly fact check. For instance, if you write a political analysis piece and there are some insights you have, which somebody's told you and you put them in, you will get a thing saying, I have looked on the internet.
I've looked on Google and it doesn't exist.
Exactly
yes,
right. Exactly
yes, Google
right.
fact
Exactly
checking.
Right. Now, how do you explain this to people?
Yes, that's true. That is true. It doesn't say so on Google, it does not exist.
That's right. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, this is a great this thing, but you've got Editrix, right? First, I want you to tell everybody why it's Editrix.
Okay, so I have been building an AI-powered editing app which is trying to solve for this very problem that Veer has talked about and Mandir has talked about, that, who's building the next generation of editors. So I learned because I was lucky to sit next to somebody who was a great editor and they taught me, and I sat next to somebody and I taught them. But after the pandemic, that chain has been broken because of hybrid working. So senior editors and junior editors no longer sit next to each other, which means I think this will affect the quality of how the next generation of editors learns how to do this job, and also the availability of the editing experience to writers in general. Because if there are too few editors, I don't think most writers will get to access this quite amazing experience of being edited well. So I made an app called Editrix.ai.
Yeah.
Editrix is, as Seema pointed out to me, is the plural of a female editor. It's an old-fashioned word, but it sounds modern. And yeah, that's what I made, because I want anyone to be able to access great editing, even if they may not be able to access an editor.
Yeah.
So that's why I made that.
But is it going to be like She, right, where there is this romance, and isn't it She with where she
The movie, yeah.
the movie,
it is
right?
She. It is
yeah,
She. Where he falls in love with Scarlett Johansson, who is
yeah,
she.
yeah.
I'm quite certain that won't happen. It's not that good, guys.
Yeah. But like, how would it work? I mean,
Yeah.
supposing I wrote a column and I didn't want to go through mounds of not always literate sub-editors, I could just give it to Editrix, yeah?
Yeah.
And they would correct it and knock out all the kinks.
Yes, you could upload a book, a manuscript, an academic paper, a long piece of journalism, whatever you like, really. And I've trained it based on everything I have learned as an editor over time, which can't be found on Google, but it does exist. And what it does is, once you upload your document, it's going to tell you how to make it better, just like I would. And it'll say, well, this is where I think that you've gone on too long.
Yeah.
Or, maybe you've, there's the inconsistency here, or whatever it is that your thing needs, and give you editorial suggestions. And it'll also give you the choice of doing it for you if you like. Or, some people might say, I want to do it myself, just tell me what it is. So that's what it does.
Okay.
But it can only do the copy. It can't
Yeah.
do the other part of the
No,
editor.
it does the developmental editing very, very well.
Well, I'll give you an example in my book,
Yeah.
which is an example she'll know. I was ending it one particular way,
Huh.
and she said, no, I wanted to be like the beginning, end it on a personal
Personal,
note.
huh.
So I read it that chapter,
Yes.
Yes.
and the book is much better for it. So could your
That's exactly the
Editrix
kind
do
of
that?
thing it would do.
It would do that?
So you would just select the final chapter of your book and say, I want to see how this ending might work out. Tell me like 2 or 3 different ways how this ending could work, and give me some suggestions on how to improve it. And that's exactly what it'll do.
Wow.
So, wow.
Yes.
So why do we
exactly.
need you?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I made it, so you don't need me. Just go buy it.
Just
No.
go with my devices.
No.
Yeah.
But I think, does it do hand holding?
No, that's why you need me.
That's why you need you. But I wanted, okay, so I'm going to open up for questions, but I wanted to ask you to repeat. I wanted, there is this aspect of course, just making the copy better, but an editor also sends a book to press, right? And there are harrowing moments where you're proofreading and you're sort of this thing and staying up at night and a lot of that. And I know that there was harrowing moments with that. So have you, do you have, I know one editor talked about how when the book is going to press, she allows her writer to call her any time of the day because it's like a baby going to this thing. Have you ever had harrowing
No,
experiences?
so I'm not that person. I've never missed even one night's sleep for anyone's book, I can tell you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, in your case, it was possibly so good she didn't need to.
I haven't. It's not my style. And no, that's never happened to me. Sorry.
Okay, so let's open it up for questions. The lady in front, and then the row of ladies. And the gentleman at the back. So first the lady in front, and then we'll go the gentleman back. Will be gender neutral. Lady, yeah.
Good evening. Hi. I would like to ask you that with the threat of AI and editing for newspaper generally being a thankless job, we are never in the limelight. So how to stay at the top of your game and stay self-motivated?
You're the AI person, yeah? You
Yeah.
answer this.
Yeah, but you're the editor in newspaper. Okay, I can tell you how you stay. I can't actually tell you how to stay self-motivated. That's too big a question. But what I can say is, if you love your job, just, I would say, show up every day and see what are you bringing to it. Stay curious about it and don't take it too seriously. Don't ever confuse your life with your work. I'm a big believer in keeping the two things very separate. You should have other interests in your life apart from your work. Don't lose you don't lose sleep over your work ever. Sorry.
Well,
I would go along with that 100%.
as a journalist, you never lost sleep over your work?
No.
That's very good advice.
No, I still don't.
The gentleman at the back.
No, life goes on.
And I know, gentleman. The lady there and then the gentleman. Yeah, the gentleman
evening.
back with the
Editing is made in the perspective of reader or the writer.
Editing is what? Sorry?
do you look at the reader or the writer? With respect to
The editing is meant for the reader. The whole purpose of the editor is the stage between you writing and the reader reading it. The editor must ultimately keep the reader in mind, because if the reader doesn't want a bad book, a boring book, a book that's repetitive, a book that's hard to read, writers are not always objective about our own work. That's why we need editors to look at it as our first readers.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. An editor is nothing more than a first reader. That's it.
the lady in front. No, the lady in the jacket. I'm sorry, and then you. Then you. I'm sorry.
Hello, I'm Malvika, and I wanted to ask you the panel, like, as ma'am has only introduced her AI editrix, and on the other hand, you also said that we need good editors, right? So it's a bit confusing. Do you think the job will be relevant in the coming years? Because I myself have a background of literature and I'm very interested, and I've also edited a couple of books. So I would want to know the relevance of the job in the coming years from the respective panel.
MA English? Are you one of them? All right, okay.
Yes, go talk to him after.
English.
All right, okay.
I think that first of all, to be very clear, I did not make this app to replace editors. I don't think you can replace editors, because what they bring, which AI does not have, is taste and judgment. Taste is something you develop, and judgment, hopefully, is also something you develop. It can be easily lost, both of them, but still, you hold on to them for dear life. But I would say, to be an editor, you have to have books to edit. And you have to be learned from someone. So I made this because you can learn on it 10 times faster than you normally would, because where are you going to find it? An editor who's going to sit and teach you over 5 years. Nobody's going to do that.
True.
So that's why I made it, because I want to be able to let anybody put a manuscript there and it will walk you through it, and you will learn. You will be a better editor for it. And it's not that you just put it in there and it spits it out. It is, I would say, it makes a bad editor good, a good editor great, and a great editor a superhero. That's what it does.
Also, in the context of Indian journalism and the poor level of editing at the moment, artificial intelligence is better than no intelligence at all, no?
Oh God.
Gosh, the desk is really going to go out
Wow.
to get you.
Yeah.
So I'm doctor by profession, and my two questions. First is ki with AI coming in big way, I'm sure the editor's job will go off in 10 years. AI will take over everything, even medicine. But at present, if I send a paper, medical paper I'm talking of, in our journals, ChatGPT or that, they'd have a screening and that is rejected if you have used AI. I don't know about you people, but in medical journal, it's still rejected.
You mean to write a paper or edit it?
Yeah. Writing a paper, if I write a paper and if we take a help of AI, it gets rejected.
Yes,
At
I know.
present, yes.
As it should.
But
Yeah,
it
it should.
should. But subsequently, I think everything will be taken over by AI in 10 years.
So
it's
I don't
futuristic.
understand the question. So,
So I was wondering if your jobs will also be
No,
taken
no,
over by AI.
your question is predicated on the assumption that
Futuristic.
10 years from now,
Yeah.
there will still be newspapers. So I question that assumption.
Yeah. And people
Well,
reading them, because the younger generation is not reading them actually.
Yeah.
They read the Twitter.
Correct. That's what I said, yeah.
That's true, but I
But
think-
there will always be books. I mean, the one interesting thing about this shift to new media and social media is that books continue to sell. I read all my books now on a computer or on Kindle, but I still read them. So books, I think the one form of writing that will survive.
That's
Would you-
true.
I think it'll thrive.
Yeah.
And I think it'll thrive because of AI. There's two reasons, if you don't mind
Yeah.
my getting into. One is, of course, because people want to read books.
Yeah.
And there is an originality to the level and the level of thinking and depth that you get, which only a book can give you. And the second is a more selfish reason, is, we are not very far away from the point where the existing AI models have trained on all of the world's data, and they're going to need more data, which means that, original thinking will come at a higher value.
Yeah.
So because you cannot train the next generation of AI without
New material.
human material. You can't train it.
Also, no tweet, no Instagram post, no blog will ever give you the joy that a good book will. no?
Absolutely.
That's true. That's true. The gentleman there, and then the gentleman, or the gentleman with this pink shirt gentleman,
Shirt. Hello. It's a shirt.
Okay then.
Point taken.
Is there clearly an editor here? Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Veer, I'm from the advertising industry.
Okay.
I've been in the advertising industry for 35 years. I love reading, and part of advertising comes out of reading.
Yes.
If you don't read, you can't write,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now my question is, like you just said, the lady here, she just said that the youngsters are not reading enough. I agree. 110%. My question now is, Veer, you've been in Delhi a very long time. Today, books are sold on the roadside and shoes are sold in air-conditioned shops. Now tell me, who the hell is going to read a book when it's sold on the roadside, and a Reebok or a shoe or a sneaker is selling for 5,000 and people are going in there and buying them, and they are selling in air-conditioned showrooms. Look at the change from your generation. I come from the same generation. That I see in the 30 years, there's been a tremendous change in reading. Nobody wants to read. Everybody wants to, like the lady said, Google. Arey saab, Google guru se bhi bada ho gaya hai. Nahin?
Yeah.
Google guru se bhi bada ho gaya hai.
I take your point, but just two things. One is that while it's true that the average person who would read magazines, newspapers, is reading less, people are still buying books. More books are sold now than ever have been sold.
That's
the
true.
second thing is, I'll give you an anecdote.
Yeah.
A guy, a headhunter, came from, I won't name the city, in the Far East to meet me, to ask me if I would edit a newspaper there. And he said to me, he said, India will go far. So I said, why? He said, because when I stop at a traffic light or I pass a pavement, people are either trying to sell me or are buying books on self-help, books on being successful, books on the state of the world. In no other Asian country, certainly not in China, is that happening. So this is a society that's trying to improve itself.
Yeah, and for
so I
example,
agree with you, there are no
Yeah.
For example,
air-conditioned cabins,
newspapers.
but is that such a bad
Thank you,
thing?
sir.
Just one second.
All right.
For example,
No, let's give
newspapers.
people
You know,
a chance.
he's-
I think
Newspapers
this
are
woman,
still
this lady
very
will
relevant.
venture out of your
That's
hand
true.
quickly.
I read the editorial every day of a newspaper.
Yeah.
I want to ask how many people in the audience read the editorial of a newspaper. For example, the Dainik Bhaskar or a Patrika or a Times of India.
We're all journalists and we're all readers, so we definitely read. In the audience,
Okay,
everybody.
let's have a final
By
question.
judging by the numbers.
कोई नहीं पढ़ता है. Answer to your question, कोई नहीं पढ़ता है. I agree with you.
No. The gentleman in front and then the lady right at the back in black. Right at the back.
Well, I mean, my question is that,
The
in
lady-
the coming future, will it be the end of independent journalism and especially freedom of press with the AI editor in place and the corporate owners, enjoying the scene, Thank you so much.
Is that
Yeah,
the
it's a
question?
possibility, that you proprietors sack all the journalists, hire a few bots, take instructions from the government, and the newspapers appear without any cost. हो सकता है.
I would say just something different. Actually, it's not the newspaper which will be sacked, it's the proprietor who will be sacked. Because there is a barrier to entry to journalism, writing books, making movies, whatever it might be. That is the threat or risk or benefit of AI, whichever way you look at it. I don't think there's any worry that people are not going to be making newspapers or writing books. If anything, I just think a lot more people will be doing it, but they will not need a proprietor to do it. They can just do it on their own.
That's called Twitter.
No, I mean, but that's why is it so
That's-
popular?
yeah,
Because
no,
there's
I take
a
your point.
long form
Yeah.
version of that.
Yeah.
It's accessible to everyone. It's a level
Correct.
playing field.
Like
So
everybody
it's a level,
has it-
anybody
Yeah.
can become a proprietor of their own newspaper now.
like look at the YouTube channels. I mean, that's
exactly.
that's
Who made news television irrelevant?
of course
Exactly.
all
The same
all
thing will
news
happen.
in. I mean, all
The
news-
studios, that'll happen.
the lady right at the back with spectacles, the one who had her hand up. Yeah, the one.
the last question.
This is the last question. The lady. Do you want to just come up in front? No, right at the back. Do you want to come in front? And we're. Yes.
Thank you. I don't know what to say. Hi, I am in the education industry for past 23 years. I want your comments on ChatGPT. Students are giving tests on ChatGPT. So what do you have to say there?
This is all Meru's area, so you can answer it.
Okay. So actually, there have been a lot of academic studies on this. A lot of US universities are doing academic work on AI-produced output and whether it improves the output given by whether it's students, researchers, lawyers. There's a lot of study. And actually, it improves, in many cases, improves the level of what is being brought out by journalists, by authors, by students sometimes. I don't think the problem to me is that, is using it going to be a bad thing or not. As long as you preserve the practice of critical thinking, that is what you have to preserve. Think of it like a calculator rather than just doing it by hand. And I think that if schools, universities focus on critical thinking and helping students to think originally and give them the power of AI, they'll only be helped by it, is my view.
If I could just ask very quickly.
I think
we are
that
out of
we've
time.
been told to get the hell out of here.
He's. If you want to talk to anybody, buy Veer's book, get it signed, and ask him all the questions you want.
I'm looking at the expressions of everybody here. I don't think we can have another question.